Okay, welcome everybody. Stacy Aviva, nice to have you. Brian, welcome. I don't know if you're with Serena or not. Hi, Brian. How are you? You're muted, but that's okay. Just wanted to say hi.
Thank you. I'm with Serena. She's also here
Great,
on the side.
fantastic. Okay, um, okay. So this is the first of two. Well, let me just state today is January 3rd, 2024. And we are here virtually at the Denver Kahila for our continuation of our Wednesday night classes. And we've been doing different mini series. Last mini series was related to the war in Gaza, and this mini series is more, I guess, theological. And it's going to talk about the nature, how these four great thinkers, Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rav Koook, the Maharal, and the Breslov, Rav Nachman of Breslov viewed humanity and the human condition, and we'll see wide variations in terms of their view of humanity. And we're going to start with Rabbi Soloveitchik and his and we'll end with the Maharal. And then next week we will do Rav Koook and Rav Nachman of Breslov. And what the next series yet is still to be determined. And I'm taking, as always, requests. So let's jump in right off the bat to talk about Rabbi Soloveitchik's view of humanity. And I will say that Rabbi Soloveitchik's view has a lot of offshoots in terms of how it affects different areas of halakha, I would say, and of course of Jewish thought. And we'll try to first lay out his view of humanity, and then we'll see how it applies to different areas of life. And of course, as we go, if there are any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to raise your virtual hand or raise your actual hand on the screen, and hopefully I will see it, and we'll be able to have a conversation. So I'm going to open up the first document that I want to use, and it is from a collection of essays on Purim and Chanukah. The essay collection is called Days of Deliverance. And as I said, it's on Purim and Chanukah. And it's on an essay on Purim that Rabbi Soloveitchik discusses his view of humanity. And what he's struggling with is the dual nature of Purim. Purim is the next holiday on the horizon, so I guess it's always a good time to be preparing for in advance. So this will give us some good Purim Torah before Purim comes around. He's concerned with, and this comes up in the Gemara, which we're going to skip for the sake of time. But he's concerned that Purim has this dual nature, in the sense that on the one hand, we have right before Purim, we have Tanat Esther, we have the fast of Esther, where Esther tells everyone in Shushan to fast because the decree was going to come down on the Jewish people, and it was scary and frightening, and so therefore we fast because, out of the element of concern and fear, and yet also Purim has an element of celebration, right? Has an element of of being joyful and being happy on Purim. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was intrigued by this sort of dual nature of the holiday. Just to give you an example, it's true we have a fast before Pesach as well, but that is only for the firstborn, and that's for a totally different reason. Right? When it comes to Pesach, we don't have a day before Pesach where we recognize the potential doom that face the Jewish people, and then we celebrate Pesach. We just we just celebrate Pesach, and the other holidays are the same. We don't have any other holiday where we sort of combine these two very opposite stances or opposite postures. So what's going on? Rabbi Soloveitchik says essentially what's going on is the Purim has a dual identity, and that's how he begins the conversation. So I thought we'd read a little bit and discuss as we go. So we're right here on the left side where it says the vulnerability of man. I hope everyone can see that. This is from again from a collection of essays which we have here called Days of Deliverance. I'll get my sticky posts off of them. Called Days of Deliverance, and it's a really excellent collection. And he talks about this dual nature of Purim. How can Purim encompass two contradictory aspects? We can reformulate the question on what metaphysical facet is this dialectic of Purim based? And then Rabbi Soloveitchik goes on to say that, and this is actually really a beautiful idea that he has, that Jews, we live in three different time zones. He says, as Jews, we have the ability to live in three different time zones. And that is going to be the second paragraph, which says number 2 on this page. Man is great and singular because he is capable of living in three realities at the same time. And the three realities are of memory, right? Things that have passed. The second is the present, of course. And the third is anticipation. And it's this anticipation that gets Rabbi Soloveitchik nervous. And that's probably true. And I wonder if this resonates with anyone, right? We all have memories of the past. We all live in the future, in the present. But it's the things that we don't know about, the things that are coming that make us nervous, right? And he notes that this is a uniquely human characteristic. That we alone of all of God's creations, we worry about things that have not happened yet. It sounds like almost like a Jewish joke, right? We have this anxiety about things that haven't even happened yet. That is a uniquely human reality. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says that is what, and this is the key word for understanding how Rabbi Soloveitchik thinks about humanity. That is what makes us feel and be actually vulnerable. That is the word that I'm choosing to sort of pick out of Rabbi Soloveitchik's view of humanity tonight and talk about human vulnerability, and we'll see how that affects our life. So it says, for example, here, man is an anticipatory being and is therefore an unhappy being, insecure and frightened. In a word, man is vulnerable. He's exposed to the absurd, to what Aristotle characteristically called accident, and Maimonides strikingly called kerry. Man is exposed to, at best, an indifferent destiny. Moreover, he was aware of his vulnerability and steady exposure. Right? We all feel fine today, but in the back of our mind, we're all nervous that we're not going to be okay tomorrow. That is essentially, in a nutshell, this feeling of vulnerability. And this explains the dual nature of Purim, as he's going to get to in a few minutes. So before we go on, let me ask you, right, in what areas of Jewish life, whether it be halacha or elements of Jewish thought or theology, right, how does this notion of the human being being vulnerable, here today, gone tomorrow, is another phrase that Rabbi Soloveitchik uses in this essay. Healthy today, sick tomorrow, right? My teacher and mentor, Avi Weiss, used to say, sort of in a melancholy and dark way, he used to say, there's no such thing as the sick and the healthy. There's only the sick and the not yet sick, which is, again, very, in this case, Soloveitchikian, right? So in that sense, where do you see this notion of vulnerability playing a role in Jewish thought? Anyone have any ideas on that? Okay, we have silence in the gallery. I don't see any real hands up or any virtual hands up. Okay, so let's look at Rabbi Soloveitchik's first suggestion. Let's talk about prayer. Rabbi Soloveitchik. Oh, I see Serena has a hand up. So go ahead, Serena.
Hi. Yeah, I sent a comment in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let me check that out. I wasn't paying attention. Thank you for reminding me. I like to call this "Remember the Future." A famous Jewish idea. You're right. Excellent. Okay, where'd you hear that from?
That I made up that one.
Oh, you made that up. Okay. So it's famous in your household.
Well, no, I think it's a Jewish idea. Just I made up the words, but
yes.
I think the idea is a strong Jewish idea. I got it from the Ya'aleh V'Yavo paragraph, where we say, "Will you remember?" and remember, and like there's 7 different words for remember.
Right.
Our ancestors and Mashiach. And I thought, well, Mashiach didn't come yet, so I guess we're supposed to remember the future, or we want
nice.
God to remember the future.
Nice. Well said. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. Ari.
So obviously you're also going to be doing different thinkers, and we didn't hit the meat of this, but I was just going to say, I could have gone in a totally different direction. So you were asking how this will manifest itself in halacha or other thoughts. And, I could think of frailty and things about sukkah maybe, but what I was going to say is the future to me, not always. Of course, I, like anyone, worry about what if scenarios sometimes, but it also has a very positive element. And in all of our lives, also, when you have a simcha that you're looking forward to and a vacation that you're looking forward to and things that you're anticipating, it was by no means obvious to me that anticipation and future oriented need to be vulnerable and sort of have those overtones. In fact, when we're talking about the future, as I think, is it Serena just said?
Yeah.
You have Tzipita Yoshua, and you have ideas connected to Pesach, that it wasn't just a one-time occurrence, and this is our reassurance that God, I helped you once, I could help you again. So anyway, not to go on and make a big speech, but this was surprising to me, although maybe in line with some aspects of Rebbe Soloveitchik. So would love to hear more. I just wanted to share that future to me is not obvious the way he's taking it.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned that counterpoint, because as I was preparing this material, which Rabbi Soloveitchik also discusses elsewhere, I felt like it was a little much. Like I felt like everyone always talked to Rabbi Soloveitchik was a lonely person. I read some of this and I wonder if I didn't know better, not that I knew Rabbi Soloveitchik, but many of my teachers, including your father, did. It didn't seem to me that he walked around all day, full of doom and gloom, and looking over his shoulder to make sure that a piano is not going to fall out of the building and crush him. So, but it did feel very heavy, and as I was reviewing it today, I sort of actually felt myself getting depressed because of it. But nonetheless, this is a theme that appears in Rabbi Soloveitchik often, and it's really interesting. So let's talk about tefillah. Rabbi Soloveitchik is in a pitched battle with the mystics and the Kabbalists as to what is the key element of tefillah. And when I say tefillah, I mean the Amidah. A few years ago, I gave a class comparing the thought of Rabbi Soloveitchik to the thought of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And this is one of the areas where their differences are most clear. There are many similarities, but here on prayer, their differences are very stark, in the sense that for the mystics and the Kabbalists, like Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, the most important element of tefillah, of prayer, are the praises of God. While for Rabbi Soloveitchik, the most important part of prayer, again, the Amidah, are the requests, right? The 13 middle requests. The first 3 are praise, the middle 13 are requests, and the last 3 are thanks. And Rabbi Soloveitchik is convinced, not only because of the number of requests in the Amidah, outweigh by far the number of brachot of praise and thanksgiving, but also because of what the very nature of prayer is. And here's what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. He says, there is a halachic conclusion to be drawn from the vulnerability of man, particularly the sudden change that occurs in his life, the unexpected blow, the surprise attack. The halachic factor that engenders the obligation to pray is need. Without human need, prayer would be an impossibility. And Rabbi Soloveitchik goes on to say that without need, saying the blessings of prayer are essentially saying blessings in vain. Because if you don't, right, why would we ask God for health if we don't need health? Why do we ask God for anything if we don't need it? So the very nature of tefillah, I would maybe in halachic language we would call it the matir. The thing that allows us to daven is the fact that we are needy, that we are creatures and we are needy. And here he gets into this whole fight he's having with the mystics. While the mystical view of prayer, for instance, placed the emphasis upon praise and thanksgiving, Judaism placed the accent upon petitional prayer, the so-called selfish, egotistical prayer. And that prayer is the result of need. If there is no need, if a man feels happy and satisfied that all his needs have been gratified, there is no need for prayer. Indeed, he should not pray. I've often thought of this as the key to why I think sometimes it's easier for people as they get older to daven. Because as we get older, even if we're healthy, we realize the potential to not be. Or even if we have a job, we realize that may not always be the case, right? The younger people always have a greater sense of being indestructible. And as we get older and a little bit wiser, we realize that may not necessarily be the case. And so our tefillah becomes a little more focused. And I think that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying here. Every benediction would be a benediction for naught, a bracha levatala. If man prays 3 times daily, it is because he is in constant need. Why is man in constant need? Because he is vulnerable. So for Rabbi Soloveitchik, the key to really davening, at least during the week, because on Shabbat we set aside these requests, but the key to davening is the recognition of our vulnerability, which means either our current need or our future future need. So that's one area in Jewish life or halacha that Rabbi Soloveitchik's feeling that vulnerability is the key element of the human condition, where it plays a major role. And I'll just point out one more aspect of this when it comes to prayer, because I found it to be a really interesting example. He talks about Hallel. Right? We would think that that Hallel, and this goes back to what I said before about Purim and Pesach, we would think that that Hallel would be total joy, right? Total praise. But Rabbi Soloveitchik points out in paragraph 4, where I put the exclamation mark, in fact, the Hallel service, the exalted song of joy, consists of 2 parts, praise and thanksgiving on the one hand, and prayer and petition on the other. For instance, Psalms 113, 114 belong to the category of praise and thanksgiving, but the others, like 115 and 116, like the famous refrain, "Save us, O Lord, we pray you," represent petition and supplication. It is strange. Just minutes before, I was singing a great triumphant song when Israel went out from Egypt, and now I see myself forsaken and forgotten. So Rabbi Soloveitchik is like, he can't turn a corner anywhere in Judaism, even when we're saying Hallel, right? He can't avoid these hints, and sometimes they're more obvious than others, but he can't avoid this tinge of the recognition of vulnerability, even when we're celebrating our most triumphant moments. And so that's one area where Rabbi Soloveitchik's understanding that we are vulnerable plays a role. Let me stop here for a moment and see if anyone has any comments or questions before we move on to one more area in Rabbi Soloveitchik's view. Serena posted something, right, in the Borei Nefashot, right? We talk about God who provides everything, Vishesronan, and the things that are missing as well. Exactly. So we can't avoid this, Serena. It's especially Rabbi Soloveitchik is pointing that out as well. Okay, Ari, yeah.
A question and a comment, and sorry, I don't mean to talk so much.
No, please.
So the question is just, could you elaborate on, from the perspective of the mystics, the goal? Is it, if God creates a beautiful world, then it's our, just as Hakarat HaTov that we're meant to pray and talk about it? Is it we're meant to, fix klipot or, just because you said you've studied and covered that in the past
Yeah,
class.
I think it's about communion with God, which I think the mystics felt was more easily accessible through feeling close to God, through recognition of God's greatness and creation. I was listening to a lecture recently by Mark Shapiro on Shaul Lieberman, the great Talmudist from JTS, who at one point was trying to get a mincha minyan together at JTS, and someone said, "Well, if we wait a few minutes, Rabbi Heschel will come down." And Shaul Lieberman, who was like out of the Soloveitchik school, a Litvak, said, Rabbi Heschel wants to commune with God and the cosmos. I just want to daven mincha, right? So it's sort of that, right? It's sort of that different approach of what's going on during davening. The mystics, I think, wanted to have this communion with God, which may have been, as I said before, easier through praise and thanksgiving. Okay. All right, Soloveitchik also says, by the way, that this notion of vulnerability also leads to humility. Right? We shouldn't think whatever success we are currently enjoying and experiencing, since we are vulnerable, we have to be humble because it could be gone in a second. We should be humble because we also should recognize that God's behind that. Even as we are required and should take pride in our own efforts, God is behind it along with us. But also, it could go up in smoke in a second, and therefore we have to be humble. But this next part to me, was the area where I really started looking more into Rabbi Soloveitchik's notion of vulnerability, because this was just really blew me away. And this is on the right side of this page. Rabbi Soloveitchik is talking about forgiveness, right? Divine forgiveness. And he asks a question: why should God forgive us? Right? I'll just play devil's advocate. God gave us the Torah. He told us how we're supposed to live. Just do it, right? And if we don't do it, then that's on us, right? Why should God forgive us? And Rabbi Soloveitchik, in answering that question, comes back to vulnerability, but a little bit of a different type of vulnerability. When it came to prayer and humility, the vulnerability was about what could happen to us, things out of our control, illness, financial loss, plague, any type of disaster, right? That's out of our hands. We never know, and therefore we should daven, and we should pray, and we should be humble because of these either existing or potential vulnerabilities. But there's another type of vulnerability that Rabbi Soloveitchik addresses, and this is on the right side here. Vulnerability of man is also a very important principle from a theological viewpoint. So first we saw a halakhic viewpoint when it comes to davening, tefillah. Then we saw sort of like a mutter viewpoint, like an ethical character trait viewpoint, where we should be humble. And now he talks about what he calls a theological viewpoint. We Jews believe that man is judged by his maker. The concept of divine judgment is a central one in our thinking. Man is judged once a year, or according to another opinion, every day, but man is judged by his maker. If man is judged, the question arises, how can he prevail? How can he be acquitted? Eliphaz already asked the question, shall mortal man be just before God? Shall a man be pure before his maker? How can a man be pronounced innocent? And then he answers, man is acquitted by his maker because man is vulnerable. So this is more like weak, I would call, but in a way that's understandable. The vulnerability of man is a factor that mitigates the harshness of God's judgment. Yes, man is a sinner. The question is, why does he sin? Why did man listen to the serpent? Why does he violate the moral law? The answer is that man has been and still is vulnerable, exposed to all kinds of pressures. I found this to be so beautiful, right? Rabbi Soloveitchik is showing us here that God appreciates the pressures and the weaknesses that we have and finds a way to forgive us for them. He is easily persuaded, a human is easily persuaded, indeed brainwashed, and quickly defeated. At times, he is challenged by an intellectual agnostic society, and at other times, he is intoxicated with hedone, the pursuit of pleasure. Quite often, he is pulled by political social movements that appear under the disguise of redeemers. In a word, the environment scoffs at his commitments and promises. Man sins because he is a weakling, because fate defeats him. On the one hand, it's a little bit of a depressing note, but on the other hand, I always found this actually quite uplifting, right? Because it actually paints a very gentle, forgiving, understanding picture of God. We try the best we can, but sometimes we miss the mark. Because God realizes, and of course God realizes this because this is the way God made us, that sometimes we're weak, as Rabbi Soloveitchik says. In the next paragraph, some are saints and righteous people because they were born into the home of saintliness and righteousness. Some are sinners because they were born into a house of atheism and agnosticism. Should the wicked be found guilty? Is he not wicked because he is vulnerable to external pressures? That is how man prevails when he stands before the heavenly seat of justice. There's also a humility embedded in this, in the sense that, if we were brought up in a particular religious home, right, we shouldn't necessarily lord oneself over those who haven't been given that opportunity or who don't know as much. Right? A lot of these things are simply out of our hands, right? And when things are out of our hands, we have to be humble about them, as we said before. And God, in turn, is forgiving. And this is, ever since I've read this, I often think about this notion of Rabbi Soloveitchik and his nod to forgiveness. Ari writes in the chat, Ma'anu machenu manamar lefanecha, alo hakol kirum ka'ayin lefanecha. Right, the great ones are like nothing before God. Maybe because not all of their achievements are of their own accord. Right, some of them, and again, I don't believe that Judaism thinks we should think we're a zero, right, and we're a nothing. I think in Judaism it's clear that we recognize that we have to, that our own hishtadlut, our own work, is valuable and required. Yet we also have to recognize that God stands behind that as well. So here are three aspects of Rabbi Soloveitchik's view of the vulnerability of human beings. One, it's the key to davening. It's the key to prayer. That if we don't really tap into our actual or potential need, then it's going to be very hard to pray, at least the middle section of the Amidah, with any type of real intensity or kavanah. Second is the need for humility, that whatever we have achieved just could, poof, go away in a heartbeat, and we have to therefore be humble about it. And three, this to me very positive and uplifting and sort of feeling of relief that we get that because of our vulnerability, God forgives us. And because sometimes we are in situations beyond our control, God forgives us for our sins. And I didn't copy the rest of this. Rabbi Soloveitchik notes that this is the theme of the two goats that are chosen on Yom Kippur. Right, one of them is brought to the temple and is a sacrifice, and there's a whole ceremony, and the other is schlepped out into the desert and thrown off a cliff. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, that both of those goats have to be identical. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says the point is they're identical goats, and by no fault of their own, one has all the glory, and one has this much more modest type of end. Of course, they both get killed, but that's not Rabbi Soloveitchik's point. Right? His point is that just by fate, because which one goes into the Beit HaMikdash and which one goes into desert is the result of a lottery. And that lottery is just like that. It's just luck. It's just fate. And just one final point: Purim, where what Rabbi Soloveitchik is writing about, is all about a lottery that Haman drew. Right. So the whole story of Purim is that the Jews are sitting pretty, and boom, in a second, their fate is sealed and it's turned upside down. And that's why Rabbi Soloveitchik focuses his discussion of human vulnerability specifically around Purim, and then towards the end around Yom Kippur because of the goats. So, is this the only view Rabbi Soloveitchik has of humanity? No, he has others as well. Maybe we'll do another series and talk about where Rabbi Soloveitchik saw actual greatness, which he did in humanity. But this is where we'll stop today on Rabbi Soloveitchik. We'll move on to the Maharal in a moment. But first, I'll stop to see if anyone has any questions or comments on the Rabbi Soloveitchik piece.
I thought it was very interesting. I just noticed a little bit of the reading there on the page where it mentioned that in the case of the 6-day war that
yes.
Israel became arrogant and kind of forgot. And I mean, how much should we correlate, things like war and, to attitude of arrogance rather than fate,
Right. So let me show you what Stacey was talking about, because this is very, 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 very current. On the right side here, parenthetically, let me add that the vulnerability of the Jew is not limited to the Jew in diaspora. Of course, the Megillah relates to the diaspora community. However, the Jews' awareness of vulnerability is universal. And he goes on to say, we are all vulnerable. After the 6-day war, the government in Israel and the top echelon of the military leadership in particular lived for 7 years in a mood of arrogance and forgot the principle of vulnerability of man. That is why they thereafter found themselves in a very unpleasant situation, to say the least. So Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying, and this goes, I skipped most of this part. Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying this goes to lack of humility, right? Our vulnerability means we should be humble and not be so sure of ourselves, and that's what led to the early disaster of the Yom Kippur War. Stacey Aviva actually is using Rabbi Soloveitchik against Rabbi Soloveitchik and saying, well, maybe that was just fate, and just like we've been talking about, some things are out of our control. No matter how well prepared we are, sometimes we're going to be beaten. That's a good question. The only thing I would say is that Rabbi Soloveitchik seems to be expressing the feelings of the time, that it was a bit of machismo, is that the word, that got the better of Israel post 1967, specifically in 1973 at the Yom Kippur War. And again, it is very current because that is what people are saying now also led to the complete unreadiness of the IDF on October 7th. A lack of humility amongst the army. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Aviva. And it's a good question. It's a good question that you raise on Rabbi Soloveitchik. Okay, let's spend just a moment on the bio of the Maharal of Prague, just to get a sense of who he was. And then we will study a few snippets from his writings. So just to give you the years, the Maharal of Prague was born somewhere between 1512 and 1526. It's debated as to exactly when he was born, and he died in 1609. His name was Yehuda ben Bitzalel. His last name is pronounced Lo or Loi or Levi in different, I'm not sure why it has all these different pronunciations. And he was important as a scholar of the Talmud, as a mystic. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, and he's most known as a philosopher. And it's his philosophy that is in many cases the backbone of Jewish mysticism and the backbone of a lot of Chassidut, a lot of Hasidic teaching. He was born in Poland, and although others think maybe he was born in Worms, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire, what we now know as Germany. He, at the age of 12, some say he went to yeshiva in Poland and studied under Rabbi Yaakov Pollack. Then he left Poland and spent 2 years wandering from place to place. Then went to other yeshivot. He was in 1553. He became the rabbi of what is now or was known as Nikolsburg, and then he was in charge of the religious community affairs of that place. He moved back to Prague in 1588, where he again accepted a rabbinical position, taking over for the retiring rabbi. He was, in personal life, he was married. His wife was Pearl. He had 6 daughters and a son. His son was Bitzalel, named after his father. And towards the end of his life in Prague, he died in 1609, and he's buried in the old cemetery in Prague. And if you go there, you can see his grave. He's well known for, he wrote a lot. There's a lot of existing writing of the Maharal, and many people consider it to be mysticism sort of dressed up in regular language. So those who are not necessarily schooled or educated in mystical thought and mystical language can still understand what he's talking about. That's a little bit about the Maharal of Prague. I want to turn our attention to the following. I'll share the screen. Okay. I hope you can see this. We're going to start with his commentary on Pirkei Avot. Did everyone see that on the screen? Yeah. Okay. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So Pirkei Avot talks about being created, that human beings were created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. Hu Yomer, Chaviv Adam shenevra b'tselem. Chi bayitira nodat lo shenevra b'tselem. Shenemar ki b'tselem Elokim asa et Adam. Beloved is man here is human, for they were created in the image of God. Especially beloved is he, for it was made known to him that he has been created in the image of God. So, Rabbi, the Maharal does something really interesting here. What does that mean to be created in the image of God? It's always hard to understand this because there is no image of God, right? We are very strict not to have any images of God or any statues or anything that even represent God. But what does this mean, to be created in the image of God? And the Maharal does something really interesting here. So let's read it together. V'yesh lefaresh ma she'amar hakatuv vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tzalmo. That God created Adam, humanity, in God's image. Ein perusho sheyesh el Hashem itbarach tzelem udemut. It does not mean that God has an image or a form. That's not true at all, right? The classic Jewish position, in lo demut haguf v'eino guf, right? That God does not have any physical attributes. So what does it mean that we're created in God's image? Malakatuv ba lomar ki kasher ba lirmoz b'tmuna hagashmit ma shenimtza b'hakadosh baruch hu be'iyun nivdal min hagashmi. He engages in an experiment here which could be quite dangerous. He's asking the question, if you were to try in some way to draw a picture that would symbolize God, right? How would you draw it? Anyone want to take a stab at this? If you were somehow, the answer is not a man with a long white beard on a throne. I'll tell you that that's not his answer. But if you were to, in some way, try to come up with a way to symbolically represent God in a drawing, right? A physical drawing. What would you draw? Anyone? I think everyone's nervous to even answer the question for fear of being struck by lightning. All right. So here's what he says. First of all, he says it's possible to draw a symbolic version of something, even if that thing is not physical. Dimyon zeh kasher balet sayer Hashem Barach shu melech al hakol. Let's remember, he's giving us sort of instructions here. If you're going to draw this symbolic representation of God, remember that you're drawing about a melech al hakol, a king over everything. Ve'en alav b'mitziut. Hine yitzayer timuna bezikifa. This is the key. You would certainly draw this image of a being standing up straight. Again, he clarifies, of course, there can't be a real picture of God. Of course, you're not allowed to draw such a picture. Whatever you find in God, you will represent in this physical picture. Because human beings are also, we naturally stand up straight, right? We don't walk on all fours. Other animals walk, stooped over. Someone who is bent over, that's a symbol that someone is above them. They have a master above them. Therefore, they are walking hunched over because someone is over them. Like a slave walks a little bit hunched over before their master. Val Hashem itbarach ein alav. God has no one over God. Lakach adam shubezikifa. Therefore, a human being who stands up, ne'emar alav shu b'tzelem Elokim. That's what the Torah means when we say that God created human beings b'tzelem Elokim. It means that God created us as beings that eventually, once we learn to walk, stand up straight on two legs to show kilomar kasher echad ba litain selen utmuna gashmit ma shenemtza bo yitbarach b'ti gashmi hine adam hu b'tzelem Elokim. When one draws a picture of a human being, you're drawing a picture of standing up straight. You're drawing a picture of Tzelem Elokim. Why? Ki adam hu ba'olam hatachton. We are in this world. U midaber hakatuv min ha'olam hatachton. The Torah is talking about what's happening here. Umitzad olam hatachton hadam b'tzelem Elokim. As far as what happens down here, we are in God's image. Again, because just like God is Adon al Hakol, we are Adon al Hakol down here. So what the Maharal has done is he's tried to explain this difficult concept of what it means to be created with B'Tselem Elokim. And so really what it has nothing to do in this passage, it doesn't have anything to do with our neshama, with our mind. It's about our physical attribute of standing up straight, which symbolizes that the human being is in charge here because all the other animals are shahua, are bent over, either totally or partially bent over. And I'm not a zoologist, so I don't know if the Maharal is 100% on the mark about every animal, but I think we get his point. For the Maharal, the nature of humanity is that we share this Adon al Hakol moniker with God. God is Adon al Hakol, Shamayim and Aretz. But when it comes to physical things, we are Adon al Hakol. And again, it's a two-step process. If you were to try to somehow represent God by drawing a physical image, you would certainly draw God standing up straight. And that because God is Adon al Hakol, and therefore since we stand up straight, we share this connection, if you will, or this similarity with God. This I think is sort of like quite radical. He gets into sort of dangerous territory of daring us to draw some sort of physical representation of God, and how willing the Maharal is how willing the Maharal is to compare us to God in terms of being Adon al Hakol. I want to take the two comments in the chat. Serena, the invisible man, God's clothing is beautiful glory, the world of scenery and more. Serena, I'm not sure I understand. You want to explain?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, please.
That was in answer to your question about how would you draw God. You know, I'm thinking of this man walking around with bandages over his head, because otherwise you would have seen like a guy with a coat and a headless man walking with maybe glasses and a hat. It would have been too scary for the people, so he put bandages on his face.
I got
so
you.
That's a famous story, a classic in literature.
Yeah, but standing up straight.
Yes, standing up straight.
Right. Next time I'll bring in Nathan Slifkin. That's a good idea. Okay, I want to just show you one other midrash here, which is related to this notion of the physical similarities between God and human beings. Here's the midrash. Let me share the screen again. Actually, I'll read the midrash here, and then we'll look at one of the commentaries. So there's this really neat midrash in the beginning of Bereshit, right here. Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'at ha'adam. That God saw that there was great evil. But we're not going to get into what the midrash is trying to accomplish here. But what we will do is, we will right here. I'll highlight it. Everyone see that highlight? Amar Rabbi Yudan, Gadol Kolchan Shel Nevi'im, Shemidamin Surah Liyotzra. I have an English translation here, I think. Rav Yudan said, how great is the power of prophets in that they can liken the creation to its creator. Remember what the Maharal said before. We're going to draw this picture. So the prophets liken the creation, human beings, to the creator. How do they do that? Two psukim. Ve'eshma kol adam ben ulai. We have a pasuk that says, I heard the voice of man by ulai, but that was really a vision of God. So God's voice is compared to a man's voice. And there's another pasuk that we have in Daniel that says, Nichaskel, Val demut hakisei demut kimar'e adam alav milamala. This pasuk means, and upon the likeness of the throne was a likeness like the appearance of man, whose work is with wisdom. So what's going on here? We have, the Maharal makes a big deal of this. We're not going to see the Maharal. We're going to just look at one commentary on the Midrash. That at first it seems to be saying that midamin tsura liotra, that we are compared to God. We're the tsura, we are the creation, and God is the yotzra, is the creator. That they liken us to God. So our voice is likened to God's voice, or our image is likened to God's image. But the Maharal notes this, and it actually comes from the Midrash, from the commentary on the Midrash. This is the Midrash, and up here is the commentary. I'm sorry it's not notated. Right here on the top, I hope you can see my little cursor. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Where it says, Gadol Kolchan Shel Nevi'im, second line from the top of the right column, Shehirshan Lidmut et Hashem Yitparach Litzorech Ha'adam. The Nevi'im were so bold in their writing that they allowed themselves to compare God to us. Right? The Midrash says we're comparing us to God, but here, really, what the Midrash is saying is God is being likened to us, and he says in Bamidbar Rabbah, it's more explicit. Ubamidbar Rabbah Parsha Yud Tet Ita Shemidamim Dimut Givura Shel Ma'ala Litzurat Adam. That God's image is compared to our image, the Kan Dibro Derech Kavod. Here it was only reversed in order to show a little bit more respect to God. So when I was reading this, I was not quite sure what to make of this, right? That what's the difference if we are compared to God or if God is compared to us? But the Maharal makes a big deal here and notes that yes, it says that God was creating, right? But Serena, you're right that He was creating us in God's image. But this midrash is saying something else. It's saying that God is made in our image. Right? That's the radical part of the Maharal, which goes just to what the Maharal was saying earlier, the extreme greatness of humanity. It's interesting to contrast Rabbi Soloveitchik with the Maharal here. In the center of Soloveitchik, talking about weakness and and vulnerability, while the Maharal is focused here on our greatness. We're Adon al Hakol, right? And someone who's Adon al Hakol doesn't seem to be very vulnerable, right? God is not vulnerable, and if we are Adon al Hakol like God is, it doesn't seem like we're very vulnerable. And then the last piece of this midrash that the Maharal talks about is that it's not that we are created in God's image, that the Nevi'im create this world in which God is created in our image. I'm not sure practically what that means, but symbolically it speaks to the greatness of the human condition. That on some level, God gets God's power, or I'm not sure what, from us. This requires a little more study on my part, Tzarech Iyun, but it did seem to me to be a powerful statement about the greatness of humanity. Ari, you wrote the Maharal makes a big deal in Avot, or is that this is Avot? This is his commentary on this Mishnah, which is 314. Sorry, 314. So we have two from very different types of Jewish thought. Rabbi Soloveitchik, sort of a very Maimonidean, anthropological approach to the human condition, based on human experience, I would argue, and comes to one conclusion. And the Maharal, a more mystical, theological understanding, not so much based on experience, but based on how human beings are depicted by the Nevi'im, which leads us to the greatness of human beings, which would not lend itself to the idea of vulnerability and weakness. Who's right? I don't know. It depends. Probably both on some level. I think, as I said before, and as Ari pointed out, I felt that Rabbi Soloveitchik was a little over the top in terms of just how vulnerable we can be. Maybe the Maharal is also over the top, just in terms of this chicken or the egg, right? Who's created in whose image? Us in God's image, or God in our image? Next week we will look at Rav Koook and Rav Nachman of Breslov in terms of their understanding of humanity, and that's it. That's it for today. We'll stop now. If anyone has any last words or comments or questions, otherwise we'll say Laila Tov and thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, for an interesting shiur.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. All right. Ari, you have a comment?
Yeah, there's a parallel thing with Reb Soloveitchik that kind of nicely complements his idea of tefillah here, which is that Ramban Nachmanides had said that tefillah is not a positive required mitzvah, and Rambam Maimonides says it is. And Ramban says only if like you're in an eight sarah, only if you're suffering. And Reb Soloveitchik famously says, yes, and the answer is Rambam felt that we're always suffering, we're always in a state of peril, and it's it's not a surprise that the same Reb Soloveitchik who had interpreted this way said the comments that you read and shared with us tonight.
And that point is mentioned in that same essay.
Oh, okay.
He mentions it there. He mentioned in a few places. It's in that essay. That was one of the very depressing things that I decided to not share because this existential angst.
Forget what I said and go back to Maharal mindset before you kick off.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Great.
Bye, Ari. I'll send it to Barry and he'll send it to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
I hope to see you again soon. All the best. Have a good night. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.